It is time for House Talks pregame. I am your host, sports mental health and empowerment coach, Dr. Lauren Pitts. Ronnie's back.
Glad to be back, everybody. Glad to be back.
We missed you, bruh. We missed you. But me and Carla held it down.
I heard y'all held it down. I heard it was a good show. I appreciate y'all. I'm glad to be back. I had to go get some sun and a little relaxation real quick, but I'm back, refocused and re-energized. So I'm excited for today's show.
Yes. So look, folks, week in and week out, we are bringing you, you know what I look at it, y'all? I feel like we hose them in the face with a fire hose. It's like AC pregame just comes, holding the fire hose, and we're like, shh, with all this information. But that's what it's all about for us. It's about educating and empowering and liberating family. Your family, our family, the HBCU family, our Heritage Sports Radio Network family. We know that this information is valuable information, that we purpose it and design it to help you, to help families, to help scholar athletes and professional athletes and their families, because what we know to be true is this. Everybody goes through stuff, right? We all have a backstory, but what we know as people of color is that some of the stuff that we go through might be a little bit different, if not a lot different than the dominant culture, merely because we are of a different hue. So we like to shed light on sports and mental health information that you need. We know you need it. We know you need it because we're not just, out here every week giving you this information just because we have nothing else better to do. This is what we live by. This is what we believe. And it is tried and true. And we know that the information that we are sharing with you week in and week out will empower you to be able to make well-informed athletic and life-transforming decisions. We also want to remind you that week in and week out, on Saturdays at this same time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, you can catch us on Heritage Sports Radio Network, and then again at 10 p.m. on Saturday nights. And look, and then again, in some Southern accent, then again on Sundays at 6 p.m. you can catch it.
Not a good Southern accent.
Well,
you working on it, though. It's getting.
I'm trying. And then again on Sundays at 6 p.m. We have got a great show lined up for you today. Ronnie, welcome back and tell them all about it.
Thank y'all. So like Dr. Pitt said, we have a very, very good show lined up for y'all today. So the title of today's show is The Madness of March Madness for Black Athletes. An annual study conducted by the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sports at the University of Central Florida found an unacceptable gap when it studied the graduation rates of players from NCAA tournament teams. According to the study, there is an 18% gap in the graduation rates of African Americans and white players. Not only was there this big gap for NCAA basketball tournament teams, also for football teams, there was a gap of an average of 27% of graduation rates between African Americans and white football players. So today we're going to be talking about, why is there this big gap? What is up with this big gap? Why is there this big gap between graduation rates? Does it have anything to do with kids going professional early, or is there really a systematic issue why there's a low graduation rate? Also, the TIES report also reported on the gender and people of color equality amongst administration staff in the NCAA and amongst universities, where they showed that over the last 20 years, there's only been a few percentage points of a change in the representation of people of color in these high-profile jobs. And what I mean by these jobs, I'm talking about athletic directors, associate athletic directors, university presidents, head football coaches, head basketball coaches for men's and women's sports. So today's show, we're going to talk about this big gap between the representation and the graduation rates amongst Black student athletes compared to white student athletes, and see if there's any correlation between the low graduation rate between African American student athletes and the low representation of them in high administration positions. Also, me and Dr. Pitts will also be giving mental health tips of the week. Dr. Pitts, do you have any businesses to shout out this week?
I don't. I'm just going to stick to the mental health tip. And certainly if you have somebody you want to shout out, you can go ahead and do that.
I don't have anybody to shout out this week, but all the Black businesses that are out there, please continue to do the good work you've been doing. You know, we know there are plenty of you out there. And if any of you want us to shout you out, please hit us up on Facebook or email us at htpregame@gmail.com so we can shout your business out. So leading into the mental health tips, Dr. Pitts, do you want to start off with the mental health tips this week?
Sure. You know, what I have said is, you know, as a couple marriage and family therapist, I really like my emphasis to be on relationships. I mean, we're all in them in some capacity or another. So what I want to share today is accept what you feel as a feeling, not a fact. Step back and notice it, accept it, breathe, watch it move through you. Feelings are information. You have to gather quite a bit to get a useful picture. I don't know if I shared that one last week or not. I think I might have shared that one last week. So I'm gonna give it to you. Yeah, it does sound familiar. Sorry about that. Take several breaths in which the exhalations are twice as long as the inhalations. In doing so, you're activating the calming, centering, sympathetic nervous system and telling the fight or flight prone symptomatic nervous system that it doesn't need to work so hard. So in other words, chill. Look, in layman's terms, chill out. Calm down, relax, sit down, however you want to put it. I think that this is so important within the context of relationships because so oftentimes, particularly when we get upset about something, we are so busy speaking to be heard rather than speaking to be understood that the communication becomes all convoluted, and then, you know, tempers get to flaring and folk get to acting crazy and whatnot. And I think that if we could all be deliberate and intentional in just pausing, just, you know, put yourself in a communication timeout for a moment, or a reactionary timeout for a moment, so that you're not running on emotion. And I know that's hard, and people have that stigma that's associated with women. Oh, you're just running on emotion. Okay, well, we're all emotional beings. And even though men might demonstrate to some degree their emotions differently, at the end of the day, we all have feelings, whether we're completely in touch with them or not. So my encouragement to you today is, particularly if you feel yourself getting upset, just pause, take some deep breaths, and don't be so quick to react. Don't be so quick to respond. Sometimes that few seconds to take a deep breath can make all the difference in the world between an argument that you really didn't have to have and a positive and productive conversation. The other one that I want to share with you is cultivate a resourcing practice by thinking of the things in your life that support you and make you feel cared for. Examples could include nature, a pet, an engaging hobby, or music. Call these things to mind to serve as a resource during times of challenge. So it reminds me of a conversation that I had with a client, actually just in this past week. The client said, Dr. Pitts, why are you so positive and optimistic all the time? I said, it's a choice. It is absolutely positively a choice to not give power to all of those things in life that have the ability to deplete you, including other people. You have to be willing to function in a healthy way. And people, what I find in this line of work that Ronnie and I do, and I say this gently, but it's something I feel very strongly about. I don't make light of any particular mental health diagnosis. I don't. But what I do recognize, and I actually just said this yesterday to a client, it took years and years and years and years and years of conditioning to get to the mental health state that a person is in. What that tells me is that the mind can be trained. The mind can be trained to be well, or the mind can be trained to be sick. Now, certainly we know that there are some extreme mental illnesses that are on a whole nother level that, require medication intervention and some other things. But even at that though, I am still, I'll call it naivete. I am still naive enough to believe that we can take control of our righteous mind and make decisions that can help us to be mentally well. We can, for those that are suffering with depression and, bipolar and mania and borderline personality disorder and all of these different disorders, they're disorders of the mind. They are disorders of the mind. And if people would be willing to not succumb to the attack on the mind, because it's a battlefield going on in the mind.
Absolutely.
There are absolute steps that can be taken to help you to be mentally well. And that was my answer to my client. I choose to be sane. I know there's some folks that question that, and that's fine. But I choose to be sane. I choose to do what Ronnie and I do in this work, which is called efficacious behavior. I choose to behave in an efficacious manner that further reinforces a positive state of mind. And I nurture that every minute of every day of my life. And it is instrumental in helping me to stay of sound mind.
Oh, I learned a new word today, efficacious.
I'm telling you, if you let her go on long enough, you're gonna learn more than just a new word. You're gonna learn a lot of stuff. I swear. I swear.
Thank you.
You know what? I'm gonna stop setting myself up like this. I'm just gonna go first from now on because I can't keep doing this. I can't keep trying to follow up this act that you're putting on out here.
I'm sorry.
But awesome advice as always. So my mental health tip this week, I want to kind of focus on what we consider in mental health field checking in. Oftentimes, we have friends and family that we check in with all the time. How are you doing? How's your day going? How are things at home? How's your relationship? How's your marriage? Things like that. But I always ask myself, I wonder how many times you actually get an honest answer for somebody when you ask them how they're doing, because when you hear the question, how are you doing? Oftentimes, especially for me, and I'm guilty of this as well. Oftentimes, if I feel like my problems are going to burden somebody, or if I just feel like what I like to call first world problems, just middle class problems, or another way of saying it, just everyday problems that I have the luxury of having. Oftentimes, I don't feel like burdening those on somebody else who's asking how I'm doing. So I'll just sit there and say, I'm doing good. I'm doing fine. Everything's great. When in all reality, well, no, I got this going on. This client's stressing me out. I'm worried about this. I got a baby on the way, so I'm worried about that. I would just say I'm good. And as Dr. Pitts can tell you, when, I'm pretty sure when you ask clients how they're doing and they say good, the first thing you probably say is, well, good's not a feeling.
Look, so what does that look like? What does that feel like is what I follow that
Right,
up with.
exactly.
What does good feel like to you today?
Exactly. Well, I'll say, what about today made it a good day? What happened today to make you say it was a good day? And so I try to get my clients to understand, saying, when somebody asks you how you're feeling, if that's somebody that you consider a friend or family, be honest, tell the truth. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes we have this prideful mindset of, no, I'm gonna figure it out. I don't want to burden nobody else, and I don't want nobody knowing what I got going on. And oftentimes when this happens, we see people who really start to believe this and end up feeling like they're alone and isolated with their own problems, as opposed to reaching out and seeking help from their loved ones. So I wanted to offer up a way of being able to ask somebody how they're doing without necessarily saying, how are you feeling? Mm-hmm. So my first tip is to offer in some insight in how you're feeling first. So that might go as, I've been having a hard time sleeping and focusing on my work. I'll be okay, but it has been tough. How have you been feeling? So what you're doing is you're giving yourself up first. You're telling them how you feel, leading off with, instead of just saying, well, how are you? Then you can say, well, this is how my day's been going, but how are you? See if they engage.
Mhm.
Another way of asking is ask something specific. That could be, what have you been thinking about lately? How has your day been? How does it feel to be you right now? Ask them something
Mhm.
specific. Give them something specific to talk about instead of just a general blanket statement.
Yeah.
Offer an activity to do together and be sure to follow up on that activity. For example, let's say I hit up Dr. Pitts and say, hey, you want to catch a movie over Zoom tonight and catch up? Offer an invitation to do an activity together, but make sure you follow up on that activity. Don't sit there and say, oh, hey, Dr. Pitts, look, Sunday night we can watch Coming to America 2, and then Sunday night gets here. I know we were supposed to do this and catch up, but look, something came up. I'm so sorry. I'll catch up with you another time. Don't sit there and offer somebody an opportunity to do something with you and then you flake out on them. Or simply give them the space, or what I like to call the open door policy, of being able to come to you to tell you how they're feeling. So you could say, I care about you and you're on my mind. No need to respond. Just want you to know I'm thinking about you. If they choose to respond and tell you how they're feeling, cool. Something I like to do with my clients who, suffer from depression and, they're not able to always get in contact with me, because Dr. Pitts, this, when you have a session with a client, they don't always get everything out in that session. And
Right.
it might be something that comes up a day later or 2 days later and they want to get it out. So for me, my phone is my business and, personal phone. However, on my voicemail, I have on my voicemail, you've reached the confidential voicemail box of Ronnie Ransom Jr., and so on and so forth. So what I offer to my clients is, I'm like, hey, look, if you have something that's really bothering you and you might not necessarily want somebody to respond, you just want somebody to listen or to be able to vent, leave a voicemail on my phone, get it all out, get whatever's on your mind, get it all out, vent on my voicemail. And if you want me to respond, put in the voicemail, please call me back or text me when you get this, or I just want to vent. I just need somebody to listen real quick, and I'll listen to it. So even if they don't want to talk right then and there, just provide that space and opportunity that if they needed to, that they can come to you. Another tip: offer support without questions. That can look like saying, I miss you. I'm just checking in. I hope you're okay, but I'm here for you if you're struggling. All right. So if something's going on with them, but they don't necessarily, are responsive to questions right now. For example, I have a friend whose mother just had heart surgery a couple of days ago. Really wasn't in for talking and stuff, just wanted prayers and well wishes and stuff like that. Cool. I send them a message like, hey, bro, I'm praying for a speedy recovery for your mom. I hope everything goes well. If you need anything, I'm here for you. No questions. If he wants to talk to me, he knows he can reach out to me. Last but not least, be curious. You can say, I'm wondering what's helping you cope right now, or have you read any good books or watched any good shows lately? Maybe sparking their interest about maybe something that they've seen or read or heard that might tie into how they're feeling or relating might get them to open that door or conversation with you. Oftentimes, Dr. Pitts can attest to this as well. Children have a hard time of saying how they feel or even discussing how they feel. Oftentimes because they just generally aren't developed fully enough at that age. And I'm talking about elementary school age and even middle school age before puberty, where they might not have the communicable words to really verbally express to you how they're feeling. However, there are things such as play therapy and, things like that, where you can observe a child and make inferences and make, maybe make gestures about what they're doing and get them to open up that way and maybe relatable. I had a client who, he had a bike that his chain kept on popping off. And, every time the chain popped off, he's like, I hate this bike. This bike is stupid, it's dumb and everything. And I was like, I wonder if how you feel about your bike is sometimes how you feel about what's going on at home. And he didn't give me a verbal confirmation, but how he responded to that question let me know that, okay, maybe he's feeling this type of way too. And the bike is how he's being able to relate to what's going on and how he feels within himself, that he can't get anything right. He can't do it right. Just like his bike won't keep the chain attached, won't work for him. So, sometimes being curious about what they got going on in their life, or if anything good happened to them, or if they've seen anything, can also spark a conversation about how they're feeling. So I say all that to say, continue to check in on your loved ones and make it a habit of checking in on your loved ones, because like Dr. Pitts said, we all have things going on in our personal lives. But if they're really a friend for you, if they're really somebody you consider family or something like that, you'll make time to sit down with that person and catch up with them and check in on them if they really mean that much to you. So, those are some tips on how to check in with somebody without just being blatant about it or just being overly aggressive on checking on how they feel. So I hope some of these tips can help you all. Y'all ready to get into this conversation?
We are, but I got to piggyback, Ronnie. I'm sorry. You do it to me all the time. So my interpretation of everything that you said is what I tell my students and my clients. Be willing to step outside of yourself and meet others in a place of common humanity with an open mind and an open heart. Life happens to us in such horrific and egregious ways at times that we become so consumed with ourselves that we don't even take the time or energy or feel like we have the time or energy to extend ourselves to other people. And I think that particularly in this time with everything that's going on with COVID, if we would just be willing to even try to step outside of ourselves and to recognize that there is always someone out there who is worse off than we are, always somebody who's worse off than we are. It reminds me, and this is what made me want to piggyback, as you were speaking, it reminded me of a situation with a family that I work with. And there, obviously there were some struggles and what have you, and unfortunately some conversation surrounding suicide ideation and what have you. And folk get frustrated, folk get, consumed. And, I don't make apologies for being as direct as I am at times, because I believe that life is direct with us. Life doesn't sugarcoat or mamby-pamby. So Dr. Pitts doesn't either.
Absolutely.
And what I said is, and this is going to sound really harsh and insensitive, but this is what I said to the adults in the equation. I said, would you rather take the time to talk it through and out now, or would you rather have to pick out a casket? Stop telling me how bad this is getting on your nerves. I don't care that it's getting on your nerves, because this child didn't ask to be here. This child did not ask to be a victim of your adult circumstances. So get out of your own head, get off of your high horse, and let's do what we need to do to get this baby healthy. We good, right? And I come hard. I come hard because in this line of work, I total transparency, I'm tired of the crisis calls. I'm tired of the crisis calls because, and again, let me just put this disclaimer out there. I am not suggesting for a moment that we all don't have stuff. I know that parenting is hard. I was a single parent. I was. But here's one of the most amazing things about parenting. It's sacrificial. It's sacrificial. Children did not ask to be conceived. They didn't ask to be here. How dare parents have the audacity to behave as if this child's state of mind is nerve-wracking to them, is offensive to them, is problematic to them, is getting on their nerves? You don't think living with a sick mind is nerve-wracking and overwhelming and devastating? It is. And to Ronnie's point, how much more complicated might that be for a child that has difficulty expressing themselves? Final thought on that, and then I'm going to pass it back to you, Ronnie. One of the strategies, I'm sorry.
I'm glad you said that, because I had to have a conversation with a close friend a couple of days ago, and I was like, look, you have to choose your heart out here. You're telling me that you got this going on, you're not getting no support from your loved one and all this type of stuff. Well, choose your heart, because you're telling me all the stuff that they're doing. Well, what's your part in this as well? You all have children together. So at the end of the day, you made this decision as well. It didn't take one person to make a child. It takes two. Right. They're here now. And you both are their first line of what a man and a woman are supposed to be, especially in a relationship. And so far, you see that your kids are already starting to emulate you all's unhealthy behaviors and mannerisms.
Yep.
So, choose your hard. Life is hard.
Yeah.
So choose your heart and understand it. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Dr. Pitts, but I want
No,
to
you're fine.
the point about crisis calls and people, just having, like I said, middle class problems or first world problems. Understand this. When you come see a therapist like me or Dr. Pitts, we really mean we're not sugarcoating it for you. Understand this. When you come to therapy, therapy is meant to give you a different perspective and outlook on life that you haven't gotten so far. Because if you were already getting that different perspective or outlook, you probably wouldn't be sitting in our office.
That's right.
So we're not going to continue to give you the same perspective and tell you what you want to hear just to make you justified in what's going on in your life. Look, everybody starts on different planes and different level fields. I completely understand that. But as adults, as able-bodied adults, even with mental health crises, like Dr. Pitt said, there are some mental health crises where, look, you just need support. That's just what it is. But for able-bodied adults who are going through mental health struggles, you have the power to change your fortune. Only you. Me and Dr. Pitts can only sit there and give you encouragement, resources, and a different perspective. At the end of the day, it is up to you to make that choice every day that I'm going to choose to go a step in the right direction and not let my circumstances, not let my adverse conditions, not let my childhood trauma, not let that dictate the rest of my life. You have to break that cycle. So when you come in our office, understand this. We're here to help you, but we're not going to sugarcoat and hold your hand. My dad used to always say, I'll carry you. Don't drag your feet.
That's right. Say that. That's real.
I like that.
You, but do not drag your feet in therapy.
Right. That's right. For those of you that are listening and viewing, Ronnie made a point about kids and having difficulty expressing themselves emotionally. I actually have a worksheet that I do with my kids that has feelings, signs, and behaviors. And what that does is that it helps them to make the connection between their feelings and behaviors. So for example, the first column that I have is anger. And then underneath of that column, I have all of the different words that we use to describe that secondary emotion of anger. And then in the second column, it has symptoms, right? So face is getting red, or you're starting to feel like you're shaky, or your stomach gets butterflies or knots or whatever. And then the behavior column is you're raising your voice, you're throwing things, or whatever the case may be. So I might say to whoever the client is, they might say, how are you today? I'm happy. Well, you look mad. No, I'm not. I'm happy. And so I'll pull up this sheet because, I'm doing all virtual. I'll pull up this sheet and I'll go to it and say, well, you're saying that you're happy. Well, this is the things that look like happy. These are the signs that tell me that you're happy, but you're up here. You're up here in the angry section. Are you sure? Well, on the playground and then, but it helps them to make this connection. And here's the irony of it. That worksheet can be used for adults too, because people have difficulty expressing themselves, and it's all beneficial. So the last thing, I'm shifting gears for a moment. What I'm going to do too for the next couple of shows, because we are, in the midst of, honoring women and this month and the contributions made to athletics, I thought that it would be really cool to share some best quotes from female athletes. And the first I want to share is, and some of these folks, I don't know who they are, but some of them I did. So a quote from Simone Biles said, "I'd rather regret the risk that didn't work out than the chances I didn't take at all." I'd rather regret the risk that didn't work out than the chances I didn't take at all. And that was by Simone Biles. All right, Ronnie, we're ready to go. I got my seatbelt on.
All right. So let's get into this topic. So like I said, today's topic is madness, the March Madness for the Black student athletes. So I found this article on ESPN's Undefeated section, and the headline was, "Big time colleges care more about money and winning than Black athletes getting degrees." Talk about a headline grabber. So of course I had to read it. So I just want to read the first couple lines of this report. So the tragic stereotype that the only thing a black man can be is an athlete, and a dumb one at that, tortures the nation's psyche, perpetuated by the very institution charged with enlightenment, the American university. In my 24th annual Graduation Gap Bowl, the story expands well beyond the graduation rates of African American athletes and the incessant racial disparity within teams where the race for black players usually lag well behind those of white players. What's now equally unavoidable is this. No matter what the graduation rates, the only smart black men allowed on campus are athletes. To be sure, the disparities remain in some cases ridiculous. Top-ranked Louisiana State University went into the college football national championship game versus Clemson with an NCAA graduation success rate of 59% for its African-American football players, compared with 92% for its white football players. Semifinalist Ohio State had a 56% graduation rate for African-American players and 83% for white players. Clemson, which lost the title game to LSU, had the highest African-American graduation rate amongst the four teams of 74%, but that still paled to the 100% for its white players. Semifinalists, Oklahoma has similar disparities, graduating only 68% of African-American players while graduating 92% of white players. The average racial disparity of 27.5 percentage points from the top teams is a reminder that no matter how much the overall graduation rates have improved over the years, the top tier teams still turn a blind eye to the accurate academic atmosphere. It should be unacceptable that LSU and Ohio State graduate barely more than half of their black players while graduating most of their white football players. So when we talk about the graduation rates amongst these top tier schools, or what we like to call the Power Five schools of Division Ones, clearly 27% difference is a huge difference. So if you take 10 white football players on any one of these teams, 9 of them are going to graduate. However, if you take 10 of their black student athletes, only maybe 5 to 6 of them are going to graduate. And it's crazy because out of the 57% of black student athletes that make up the majority of football teams, and the up to 74% of black student athletes on college basketball teams, they're only graduating half of those student athletes. Why is this happening? So when I first read this article, my initial thought was, and just off the top of my dome thought was, I mean, typically most black student athletes, they leave early. That was my initial thought process, is they leave early. You know, I mean, when you look at the schools like Clemson, Ohio State, LSU, these big Power One schools, let's be real. Oftentimes, those kids aren't being recruited to college for academics. They're being recruited to college because it's an opportunity, not only an opportunity for the kids, but it's really an opportunity for these schools to exploit these children's talent for their profit. So that was my initial reaction. But as I started to really think about it, I felt like, me personally, I'm also a perpetuator of this stereotype of, well, I mean, hell, they're leaving early to go get millions of dollars. However, like we always say, what does the NFL stand for? Not for long. The average NFL career is only 2.3 years. So, and most of the times, only 30 of those players who get drafted out of the 256 that get drafted every year, only 30 to 35 of those players are going to see anything over $1 million in their first year of their rookie contract. For example, Dr. Pitt's beloved Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott, before he signed this contract a couple of days ago, his first couple years in the league, he was only averaging $400,000 or $500,000 a year. This is the starting quarterback of America's team.
Wasn't he a third round pick?
Fourth round.
Fourth round.
Okay. Yeah, fourth round pick. So, you know, understandably so, you know, he's not going to make a lot of money. However, I feel like I'm also a perpetuator of this stereotype of, you know, well, here we see this large graduation gap. My initial thought was, you know, well, these kids are leaving early to go to, especially in college basketball. And I was actually shocked to see that the gap between the graduation rate of black and white student athletes was higher for football than it was basketball, because when we think of college basketball, we think of one and done. We think of a lot of these kids probably could go from high school straight to the NBA league, because developmentally, you can kind of get away with being a small frame in basketball. You don't have to be, you know, 6'6", 300 pounds, solid muscle, just jacked off jump. You can kind of get away with being lanky, skinny, very athletic, and have technique. So I was kind of shocked to see that football's graduation rate had such a larger gap than basketball. But I started to ask myself, I wonder how much of this is because of the system. And like we've talked about, the system of luring these kids from these low income areas and selling them this dream of, hey, look, you come to this school, we'll give you an education, we'll pay for your education, but you basically have to live a life of where you have no life for 4 to 5 years in hopes of making this dream of making millions of dollars for your family. So while I think that, the schools definitely have a motive, I also think that as a community, we also have to change that notion of like, look, if you want to go play college sports, that's absolutely fine. Nobody's stopping that. However, what's your plan after college? And this basically the creation of the show is to talk about life after college. But we don't do that a lot for our high school athletes or our college athletes who are currently in college. We don't talk about life after football. And like I've said before, life after basketball. And like I've said, I can't tell you how many student athletes I know who have BS degrees. And what I mean by, and I'm not talking about bachelors of science, I'm talking about, bull crap degrees. Whether you're not going to be able to make no money in this world nowadays. The world is changing. The world is changing by the day. So we're not preparing these student athletes for life after sports like we should. And what I think that's also, contributing.
Let me ask you a question real quick. I'm sorry. So my question is, because I'm thinking about the numbers in my head, that when you look so we're talking about this disparity in the graduation rates and the student athletes that actually go on to the league, but that's a stark difference. When you look at the teeny tiny amount, whatever that small percentage of athletes is that actually go to the NFL and the NBA draft or Major League Baseball or whatever the case may be, in comparison to the hundreds of thousands of scholar athletes that are on all of these teams all across the nation, isn't it fair to say that very, very, very small percentage of students that go to the draft and are actually drafted, they're not even putting a dent in those graduation rate statistics? The number of students that don't go to the draft who also are not graduating is exponentially greater than those students that leave, sports because of going to the draft. So doesn't that mean there's something more disparaging at play here?
Well, think about the difference between football season and basketball season, right? Beginning of football season, there are no classes, right? You're in the mix of it. All right. You're in the mix. Matter of fact, you might be in summer school then prior going to preseason conditioning. Basketball season is the whole freaking year, basically. You're going through preseason conditioning. Soon as you get in, you're playing ball with your team. It may not be practice, but November comes, you got to practice. November, December, January, February, March. Then it's then a spring semester, then a spring break. So unless a kid is very disciplined about how he goes or how she goes about their studies, I could see there being a failure there. You're talking about 2 to 3 games per week for like 3 months straight, and traveling, and especially the type you're talking about, the Power 5 schools. Now, I bet if you look at some of the Division 2 schools, which some of the Division 2 schools, Division 3 schools, some of the smaller conferences that don't travel as much and as hard, you'll get a different number. I don't know, but because it's the difference between me being a Division 1 power a major Division 1 referee and a high school referee.
Absolutely.
High school referee, I'm just going around, maybe 20, 30 miles versus major D1 referee, I'm getting on the plane. And then once I get on, I got to be at the game an hour, the day of, the morning of. Then next, I got to fly out of that city into the next city. So I would gander that's the difference. And even in football, you're not traveling all week. I mean, you have a whole week of classes, and then see game night be Friday or Thursday. So I would imagine if I was a coach, you do your walkthroughs prior to travel. And you're gonna have maybe your tougher practice schedules being maybe Tuesday and Wednesday.
So are you
Is that
saying
right?
that athletic rigor, or
And
are you,
yeah,
you're
you're
saying
talking about
athletic rigor is definitely a contributor to the
right.
disparity that we're seeing in the graduation
Exactly.
rate
Yeah,
for
yeah.
athletes of color?
I mean, just what I've experienced while at Maine, and
Okay.
that was a minor, mid-major program.
So,
So
so
we did a
I,
lot of travel.
I do agree with as far as like it's between basketball and football. Basketball does require a lot more traveling. I will say though, as a former football student athlete, we did not have any time off in my 4 years of school. Whether it was football season, whether it was winter workouts, spring practice, something within the community, volunteering for other sports, we didn't have no time off. And to your point, yeah, we had, the full week of practice and classes and stuff. But I promise you, my day started at 5 a.m. and oftentimes it ended until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and was right back at it, So I do agree with that where, the rigors of basketball traveling and stuff like that definitely does put a hamper on it. I don't know how they personally do it, where if I got a game on Wednesday night and I got a final the next day, that's a lot. But I wanted to also read out these stats as well real quick, because I also think that, not only having, the graduation rate so low, I think having that representation on campus period is also a factor. So out of the 78 bowl eligible teams that played Division I last year, I want to read out some of these numbers because this is crazy. So at LSU, for instance, only 1 out of every 125 white male students are scholarship athletes, but 1 out of every 11 black male students are scholarship athletes. That makes the black male student 11 times more likely than a white male student to be a scholarship athlete. This is only the tip of this insidiousness. At Tulane, Utah State, Wyoming, and Utah, every other African-American male student is a scholarship athlete. At San Diego State, SMU, Boise State, Appalachian State, and Wake Forest, 1 of every 3 black men is on a sports scholarship. The ratio is 1 in 4 at Washington, Marshall, Hawaii, Miami of Florida, Iowa, USC, Notre Dame, California, and Oregon. It's 1 in 5 at Central Michigan, Washington State, Virginia, Baylor, and Miami of Ohio. So not only do we see where this disparity amongst, how many black student athletes are actually graduating, as a whole at these top tier institutions where the majority of their rosters are African American, what we see here as a whole on their campus, they're very underrepresented. I mean, underrepresented as far as just being a student, because at the end of the day, it's student athletes. Student comes first, because in college, you can't be an athlete without being a student first. Yeah. But what we see here is a lot of these student athletes are the students themselves. That's all they see. Now, one might argue, hell, you use Utah and Wyoming as an example. How many black people are in Utah and Wyoming, period? I completely understand that. However, I have a quote that this article says. It's funny how these schools can go all across the country searching for black student athletes, but they can't find black students to come to their school. One might argue, well, hell, they're only there to play football and try and get to the league. Well, I mean, don't you want multiple, don't you want different representation at your school anyways? Some might not, and some might not. We know that to be true. A lot of these schools, there's a reason why they're called PWIs. They want to keep it that way. Vice versa, it's the same thing with HBCUs. There's a reason we want to keep HBCUs, because that's our safe haven, that's our home. However, if you're going to exploit these student athletes for their athletic abilities and to make a profit off of them, but you don't have representation across campus, this not only as far as student athletes go, we're also going to touch on how the There's a lack of representation in the administration spots and in the head coaching spots and athletic director spots. So you see this disparity amongst the representation, not only for the students and student athletes, but also amongst the coaches and ADs as well. So how do you all feel about that point as far as the, because when I think about it, like I didn't go to a D1 school. So when I think of, there not being enough representation for these Black student athletes, what I'm hearing is there's not enough Black tutors to help these Black student athletes. There's not enough Black professors on campus who understand, or even a teacher who's understanding of the student athlete life, understand that, hey, look, these kids are here for a reason. Let's not use our own personal biases to shun these kids or not help them. But we see that a lot. I've seen professors where they know you have a student athlete in your class and they will do everything in their power to make sure that student athlete struggles because of their own personal biases. Right. So I also think a contributing factor to this gap in graduation rates is the lack of representation and the lack of help for these student athletes of people of their own color. How do you all feel about that?
Well, I mean, I've been in a situation where, the school itself got rid of academics because of the attitude of the professors. Mm-hmm. So a whole Division I program just disappeared because they did not want that school to be known for sports. So, biases are gonna happen. Mm-hmm. That's a good that's a provocative question about would we complain would we begin to complain if those same schools that were giving out scholarships didn't give scholarships to Black athletes? I understand.
Just not give them scholarships, period, but expect the same responsibilities from them.
Well, the responsibility, as you know, for an athlete is we all know is demanding, right?
Absolutely.
So I do believe in giving that athlete support, especially because of the academic and the athletic rigor of pulling two dual pieces together and making it work. Mm-hmm. So, I agree with some representation and support for that. And, while I was at Maine, I had a professor who kind of, drew back at the point that, that the student athlete didn't need support, that they were there to learn and they'll figure it out. Some ways I believe in that, but then some ways, you have to, if you have an immature athlete who hasn't quite matured to that level, is to support them to that point, not baby them, but support them.
I'm gonna throw a monkey wrench.
Of course.
That's what I do, right? I think it's deeper than that. And how can we expect these children to go to college and to be academically successful when the value of education was not placed upon them at home? And by the way, part of my dissertation research actually looked at the value of education and how it was viewed in Black and Brown communities. And one of the findings of my research is that there are so many, certainly we know that it's not the case in every home, but there is a huge education and academic outcome gap between Black and Brown ethnic minority children and Caucasian children. And it's been that way for decades. So part of that is it really, in my opinion, it's a systemic issue that we're just seeing the residual effects of it at the collegiate level, because what's happening is the value is not being placed on education in the home. Then that goes into a extremely flawed, particularly public educational school system that is not designed in many ways to provide a stellar foundation of education for children of color. And then when you know, that's a show in and of itself, because when we look statistically at the rate that Black and brown boys and girls are suspended from school and diagnosed with ADHD and put in special ed and experiencing, you know, harsher disciplinary action and things of that nature, all of these things are coming into play. And then the other thing that my research looked at is, to your point, Ronnie, at the collegiate level, there is a huge gap in representation at the high school level and at the middle school level and at the elementary school level. A lot of these schools, even in the hood, you walk into those schools and it's white teachers. It's white teachers teaching these Black and brown kids that are, you know, in so many ways, how can we dare say that cultural sensitivity is not a critical part of learning? That's like saying, that's like somebody said to me the other day, you know, when I look at you, I don't see you as a Black woman. I just see you as Lauren. Y'all know I cuss.
Please talk on it, please, because
Y'all know I hate cussing.
I hate.
I keep telling people I'm a work in progress. Dr. Pitts cussed y'all. Beep. What do you mean? So you just stripped me of my cultural identity and you just see me as female. I'm a Black woman. It's part of who I am. It's part of my identity. It has molded me and shaped me and been instrumental in me being Lauren Denise Pitts. What do you mean? You don't see me as a Black woman.
I'm surprised she didn't say, well, I don't see you as a Black woman. I just see you as an American. Oh, really? I'm surprised she didn't go that way. But to your point about the being underrepresentation in low income schools, I can't tell you how many times my clients have dealt with white teachers. Now, look, I know if that's what you choose to do, if you choose to go in them inner city schools and be a teacher, kudos to you, because they need teachers. However, if you are white or if you're of a different race that's not Black, and you go into these 95% Black schools that are in these areas where school, I promise you, school is the absolute last thing on their mind. And then you get where, I never forget, I had a teacher who said she had the nerve to say she felt threatened because a 9-year-old client had an attitude with her. Failing to realize that.
I had in grad school from my members of my cohort. Went to the dean on me, talking about they were scared of me.
Failing to realize that this 9-year-old kid just had his father tell him, I don't want to be in your life. I'd rather go be in jail than be in your life.
Wow. You
think he wants to listen to school, and then you have the nerve to feel threatened because you don't understand cultural competence of African Americans in those environments. So, and I also think, to your point, as far as it starting in the schools, I think that's also an issue that we've talked about before, where, you know, and I always say it might be the path of least resistance that is being preached to these children, especially, you know, these smaller student athletes, where it's like, hey, look, your one job is to save the family and get to the league. So don't worry yourself with studying biology or chemistry or business. Go study PE. Go study gym.
All right.
Just get to the league. Don't worry about it.
I'm about to throw a wrench in this. All right. So on the LinkedIn, there was a LinkedIn article. I meant to send this to you earlier this week, Dr. Pitts. The NBA commissioner, Adam Silver, supports a new league that pays high schoolers $100,000. So even as we speak, I mean, it's almost like, I mean, it's about to change. The world is about to change in terms of big money in college sports. It's about to go down to high school sports, right?
And while that's not and I saw that because I think basketball is really trying to be the trailblazer for equality in a sense, but who's to say that, you know, the commissioner starting this league where he's paying high school athletes $100,000 and they only got to be in this league for a year. But I'm surprised to see, like, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be majority Black student athletes who jump on that opportunity.
Well, think about the LaMelo Ball. Is it LaMelo?
Yeah, LaMelo Ball. Yeah,
who went to Europe. I personally, I think the way it's going to go is student athletes, instead of going to college, the better student athletes will go to Europe, either the lower leagues or if they're good enough, play at the major Euro
Oh yeah,
league.
and I think that is a way that they can take back power. But even then, I think within the realm of this conversation, as far as like representation and as far as like being represented, at for the black student athletes, I think even if the league where they give these kids 100,000, well, who's going to be coaching them? Is it going to be all white coaching staff, or is it going to be a mixed coaching staff? Like and I think that's the issue is like, even you, like if you give an 18-year-old 100,000, I mean, we expect it's funny how we expect student athletes to just automatically grow up overnight. Like you have to talk a certain way overnight. You have to, because I never forget it. Every year,
$100,000, what I do with it?
Oh no! Oh, I can tell you right now, I got $1,600 refund check as a freshman in college, and I blew that within 2 days. So you give me 100,000. Yeah, I mean, I can't even tell you what I'm gonna do with that. But my point is, you're giving these kids, and a lot of the time these kids are making decisions, making decisions based off emotions and not logic. And you start to see that trap where, especially kids who are from underserving areas and impoverished areas, where they make decisions based on emotions of how they're feeling. Like if they're really angry, they'll make a split-second decision. If they're really happy, they might go blow a whole bunch of money. Things like that, where if a child has a natural, healthy development, has a strong support system, like somebody like LaMelo Ball, whose father was very much involved in his life. He had both parents in the household. And, I'm all for team ball. Like what LeVar's done for his 3 sons, I mean, it is nothing short of a miracle because he's got 2 of them in the NBA and he called it. So, but that's not the norm for black student athletes. Like they're kind of like the outlier.
Now, I mean,
as
they used to say, Walter Williams said before, I'm gonna say this, I don't know who I might, whose feelings I might hurt. It said before white folks start liking us, we had more parents, 2-parent houseldholds.
Absolutely.
They started liking us, and then they convinced us that we don't.
And we saw how, and I mean, even to your point of the 2-parent household, in the black families, dating back to the, from the end of slavery through up until the quote unquote crack cocaine era, you started to see this dismantling of the black family, starting with the black man, because if you remove the black man out of the house, then you make the woman have to play both roles, which is just unrealistic. And then by doing that, and I see this all the time now with single parent households, and Dr. Pitts, if you want to elaborate more on this, when you break down the family structure and you force the woman to play both roles, you automatically force the oldest child to play the second or pseudo parent in a sense.
Parentified child.
And that system perpetuates itself because now the oldest child has a sense of responsibility and they automatically have to look at life differently. Their natural development has automatically been stunted because of the situations that have been presented to them. We talk about this all the time. It's crazy how they lock the fathers up for selling crack and cocaine, but damn, we turn right around and give these kids Adderall like it's candy.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's the same exact
well, yeah, but yeah. I
so
say,
like,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
And I say that because it's like, by dismantling the black family, we start to see this chain reaction where it's like, it's almost like if you see a 2-parent household in a black family, you're looking at a unicorn family in a sense, because it's like, well, damn, like, what's going on here? Like, this is rare now. And it's sad that it's like that. And
that didn't happen into the 60s. That did not happen to the 60s.
Exactly. And you start to see where when segregation ended and you saw where, and black communities supporting one another disappeared, jobs disappeared in those communities, which made it harder for black men to get jobs and support their families, which forced the woman out of the house to also get a job and make ends meet, which forced the children to be by themselves. And oftentimes you see where the grandparents are no longer in the picture because either they're just, they're somewhere else or they're not able to watch it. You start to see this breakdown of a system that has caused this massive bleeding in the black community. And, it starts at home. Like we always say, it starts at home. So to your point earlier, Dr. Pitts, where you say like, we see this misrepresentation at the collegiate level because it didn't start at home. I think we will all agree with that wholeheartedly. and changing it at home. And we talked about this before, getting student athletes to realize at an early age that yes, you can play sports, you can have a love for sports, but one day there will be a day that you won't be able to do this no more. And I remember, me and Jared had talked about that where, when we were 17 and 18, we weren't trying to hear that. We weren't trying to hear about that one day it's going to end. We weren't trying to hear that you're not going to be able to play football no more and do this for fun. And that's the only thing you had to worry about was who I'm going to pancake on the field or how many touchdown passes I'm going to throw. That day came. And, it was a struggle. Fortunately enough, me and Jared, we were able to, we had a support system and things like that. But think about all the student athletes that were our teammates and the student athletes across the country who don't have a support system, but they've never had a support system their entire life outside of the sport.
Yeah. Well, that's everybody goes through that transition period, and I honestly think that's an important element to add to college athletics, because the Army, they've set it up where they're helping soldiers with their transition, and you know as an athlete, you push your brain, you push your body to the limits where you know where you're going, and you get to that goal. So once you get to that goal, now what? Right? Now it's time for other goals. So one that will be a good teaching element for collegiate athletics, is using your brain, using your mind to create the next goal. And I wish that it starts in elementary school.
It
How
should.
teaching kids how to think, because if you notice little kids, they understand, they understand their power. For
It's
some
funny you
reason,
say that, and Dr. Pish, you might know the numbers a little bit better. I might be messing up the numbers, but from studies I've read, children ages 4 to 6 are thinking at what they consider genius level capacity. However, from the time a child's born until they're 18, they're told no over, I think, 180,000 times. So, and this, when you tell the mind no, the mind will stop.
right?
Whatever it's thinking, whatever imagination, whatever dreams, aspirations, if somebody tells you no, your brain automatically stops that thought. So to your point, yeah, I do think, and I think oftentimes to your point, we look at kids like, oh, they don't know. I tell my clients' parents this all the time. Children are very aware of emotions, feelings, things going on in their life. Now, they might not have the aptitude or the brain development to be able to communicate that to you, but that does not mean they don't feel the same feelings that you feel as an adult. That would just be ignorant of us to sit there and say, well, a child doesn't feel this until they're older. A child's not going to understand this. They might not understand the context because they don't have context, but that doesn't mean they don't feel it. They don't internalize it. So I think to your point, this should start, and we've talked about this on previous shows about how can we start this earlier in the chain, because I don't know if y'all saw this. Patrick Mahomes and his wife just had a baby girl a couple weeks ago. Well, Texas Tech done already offered this girl a scholarship for, I think, soccer or field hockey. Girl only a month old. They already said, hey, look, she got a spot on this team in 2039, 2040, whatever it is. But she's got a spot on this team and she chooses to come here. Well, now I'm gonna assume Patrick and his wife are gonna definitely, prepare their daughter to how to navigate that world because they have the resources and support system to do that. But what about the person who is just like Patrick Mahomes, but is in elementary school right now and doesn't have that support system? Where do they get that help with those resources, that knowledge to know that, hey, look, you can do this and you can be very successful in sports, but you also got to have an education. And it might not have to be formal education, but you have to be educated because education is forever. They can't take your mind away. You always hear people say they can't take your degree away, they can't take your mind away. Yeah. Well, they can take your body away, they can break the body down, but they can't break your mind down if you don't allow it and you have the mental fortitude and it's been conditioned in you from an early age to get to that point. But I think what you're trying to say is, Carla, like that isn't afforded to a lot of these kids, and I think that is very true.
Well, Ronnie, I remember that study. I think it was a lot younger, and I think it's from out of the womb to the first day that they go to school. That's when their intelligence goes down.
Yeah.
Because there's some type of knowledge that goes in to them inside the womb. I honestly believe
Oh
that
yeah.
because I've watched my nieces. I watched them grow from one to once they hit school, something changes in them. It is I don't know if they just suck in all the negative energy of everyone else, and they start hearing words like how they describe poor kids, disadvantage. If
Mm-hmm.
you keep that word is not a good word, and we need to stop saying that. I mean, why is being black synonymous with being poor?
It's great. And to your point about children being, and I don't know the exact number, but I see it maybe once a year. How many times have you seen a young African American kid or a young African kid go to a college at 6, 7, 8 years old?
Right.
Going to college.
Right.
That's not by accident. That's not by mistake.
Right.
That's not just happenstance. Now I will say this, and I could be completely wrong. And if I'm wrong, please somebody provide me the information. But I don't see other races of kids being that young going to college or being considered a genius and stuff like that. I just don't see it. I could be completely wrong. Not saying that it's out there, but you see these young black kids who are, I mean, just extremely gifted intellectually, not athletically. And it's to your point, and to your point about stereotypes, and when we look at kids, especially African American kids who are over 6 feet and have good size to them, I can't tell you how many times when I was 20, 21, even though I did play football, somebody look at me like, "You look like you play a sport. You play football?"
Well,
Yeah, I play
you have
football.
nice broad shoulders. Well, I mean, my niece right now, she's 12. And my mom, who is, in her words, 5'11" and a half and 3/4. She says my 12-year-old niece is looking her in the eye.
Mm.
So, but I talked to my niece Renee, and she's like, I don't do basketball. but see, I believe in that mental, physical, spiritual connection. I
Absolutely.
believe that that connects us with our God. So I believe in that connection. So she's gonna do something physical,
Absolutely. And there's even a
even
video
if it's
of,
playing tennis or golf.
do y'all remember Greg Oden from Ohio State back in the early 2000s that played basketball there?
Yes.
Greg Oden was a beast.
Yes.
Greg Oden was about 7'2", couldn't be stopped at all.
Injuries.
Fortunately, he had several knee surgeries and a couple foot surgeries, and I think he only lasted 3 years in the league, and I only played maybe 1 or 2 games.
Yeah, he signed that contract and immediately got hurt.
Mm-hmm. But there's a video of him that I just saw resurface. I've seen it a couple times before, but he's on Ohio State's campus there to finish his degree.
Right.
And of course, when you're 7'2", you're gonna stick out. Nobody else is there that size. And it's literally he walks maybe 100 feet. Within that 100-foot walk, it was 4 white people who asked him, "Do you play basketball? Do you play a sport? You look like you would play a sport or should play basketball." And he was like, "Yeah, I used to play, I used to play before," and stuff like that. And just kept it pushing. And it's just like, why subconsciously that's the first thing that comes to our mind when we see a well-built, black student athlete? Why is that the first thing we think of? Oh man, you should be a ball player, or man, you need to go play basketball or football. You this side. I mean, I'm guilty of it too.
I'm guilty because I'm as a coach, I'm gonna see a tall girl and say, "Hey, you play."
I've seen.
You know what it is? It's conditioning.
Yeah.
It's conditioning, because when I think about, over the years that people have constantly questioned me about my build within the context of, did I run track or did I do gymnastics? Well, there weren't co-ed track and field teams back when I was in high school. It was the boys, and that was it. I really think that it is a multi-generational systemic issue that is at the moral fiber of this country and the world where people of color are concerned. It's almost as if that's all we're good for, right? It's like people don't look at us and say, "Oh my God, Ronnie's so smart, Carlos so smart, Lauren's so smart." It's like and again, this could be my junk. I don't know. I try not to tie everything to the residual effects of slavery, but I do believe that there are some connections. So what was it about slavery? It wasn't about how smart we were. It was about how physically able we were. And when you think about, for example, movies like The Great Debaters with Denzel Washington, and
one of my favorite
we've heard
movies.
about the Willie Lynch letter and things like that. What was the objective? What has always been the objective? To keep the body strong and the mind weak. Well, why? Because if you have a weak mind, I can control you. I can get you to do whatever I want you to do. And now it's, and this is just my belief. I'm sure there are plenty who disagree, but you know what? I don't have to be, as a person of color, in the grand scheme of things, I don't have to be dominated, if you will, by the dominant culture, because this mindset, this ideology, this behavior, this limiting behavior to our beliefs in ourselves and the greater good has been woven so deeply into the consciousness of us as a people that, you know what, I don't, nobody white has to say, oh, well, you know what, you're not this, that, and the third. That's what we tell each other. That's what we tell each other. These kids can get beat up in their home. They can get told how many, and you know, I have, Carla, you might not know this, but on previous shows, I have gone in on these mamas who said, you just like your trifling daddy, you ain't gonna be never this, that, and that. You talk about something that puts me on the moon. You do know that they didn't ask for you to lay down with him, right? You do know that they didn't ask to be here, right? I go in, and I in the same thing where the men are concerned, because it's like, excuse you, for real, that's what we do. And without understanding, to both of your points about, you can shatter a child's spirit like that. You don't even, it doesn't even take you beating them up every day and telling them that they're nothing and they're never going to be anything. You catch them vulnerable one good day and say the wrong thing to them, that child, and I just had this conversation yesterday, the bad stuff is easier to believe. So if you are already in an environment that is fed you into believing that you are nothing and that you will never be anything, and you are reminded of that every day, and you look all around you and all you see is nothing, and then you have a society and a school system and a world that tells you that because you're black or brown, you're never going to be anything. Well, that's a hell of a fight to have to fight, to try to have to overcome all of that. I had a lady tell me one time, and I've been so tempted, you know, me and the other part of myself. She told me when she looks at me, all she sees is negative, negative, negative. That's what she told me. And it's like, for real? That's all you see? And this wasn't, 10, 15, 20 years ago. This was in 2006. So this was just, what year is this? This is just 15 years, This was in recent years, and I'm like, people, and oh, by the way, this was a black woman. This was a wealthy, this was a multi-millionaire black woman who said to me, when I look at you, all I see is negative, negative, nothing. You're nothing and you're never gonna be nothing.
And and to your point, I just a couple points off what you said. The first point I wanted to talk about was, when we talk about the residual effects of slavery, I wholeheartedly believe in post-traumatic slave syndrome. And when we talk about that prolonged trauma, and what do we always say about trauma? Trauma that goes unaddressed doesn't go away. Right. So for people to sit there and say, oh, well, there's no residual effects of slavery 400 years later. Well, when in the last 400 years has it ever been addressed on an actual global, well, not a global, a national level, where it's like, this is the forefront of conversation. Like, this is an extreme trauma that was projected onto these people for so long. When are we finally going to address it? Let's be real. It's probably just starting now to be addressed within the last decade, honestly, so there's that. And then to your point about, children being, broken down by families and things like that, I always tell people, when you used to hear the term sticks and stones may break my bones, but words never hurt. Well, that's BS. You know, you can verbally traumatize a child and they will take that with them. I always tell people, if a loved one tells you you ain't crap long enough, eventually, if you stay around, you're going to believe it.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't believe it, you would leave. And then to your last point about when we talk about, and I think there's a fine line between, you know, projection and really believing, and that's why, you know, as far as verbal abuse goes, those who sit there and say they have self-awareness in themselves and have self-love and have self-respect, when somebody is belittling you or they're, you know, talking down on you, I always wonder to those people, well, how much of that you sit there and say you got self-respect for yourself and self-awareness, I wonder how much of that really cuts through to you, because if you had this level of self-awareness, you would understand that it's projection. Oftentimes it's people projecting how they feel about themselves onto you because it takes the accountability from them. You know what I'm saying? So, and I think
next week, not to cut you off, next week on the show, next week's show is entitled Athleticism or Slavery. And I'm not going to give it away, but I'm going to do an activity during the show next week that I'm going to continue to circle back to throughout the show. And my hope is that the viewing and listening audience will allow it to penetrate the fiber of their soul the way that I want it to. It's a clinical activity that I do. And in that, and I want to share this real quick, and we can keep going. In an article that I read from the Center for American Progress, it was called "The Madness Doesn't End in March." It says, when Black male athletes represent a large proportion of a college's total Black male enrollment, it perpetuates damaging stereotypes that could signal to young students and young Black men in particular that athletic programs are the primary pathway to higher education for Black men. Because of these stereotypes, students, teachers, and coaches may disproportionately emphasize athletics to young men of color over academics as the best path to a college degree. This perception has serious implications for young men of color who do not only have lower college graduation rates overall, but also have lower graduation rates in comparison to white male athletes. I want to hopefully make a couple of connections for you all just based on my clinical perspective. I think that just that mindset, that experience is relevant to female scholar athletes as well. First and foremost, I don't have the statistical information on that, but I think, you know, as we each illustrated that, you know, people look at us and it isn't oftentimes, depending on how you present or how you show up based on your physical stature, people don't say, oh, I wonder how smart they are. They say, oh, do you play a sport? It's almost like a default, right?
Mhm.
I think that because this is such a long lasting systemic issue, I think that this cultural stigma that we deal with as people of color literally just continues to erode, and it shows up in every level of the academic trajectory of our students, and people act as if they're surprised when in actuality it's nothing new, right? We have seen this over and over and over and over and over again, and it's not being addressed. Why? Because where other ethnicities are concerned outside of us, there is a lack of cultural sensitivity. There's a lack of cultural awareness. The experience that we have as people of color, whether people care to acknowledge it or not, is different. It is different. It has always been different. I believe that it will always be different. And I think that we have to be very, very careful to discount that and to suggest that growing up Black or brown isn't a different experience. There are a lot of things that people, regardless of what ethnicity, that you have to navigate through and make sense of to live this thing called life. But then you have situations and circumstances in life that you have a lot more that you have to dig yourself out of. You have to be prepared. You have to be mentally strong in order to be resilient, in these situations and circumstances that these scholar athletes are finding themselves in. But here's the systemic issue. If nobody has taken the time to educate and empower and liberate some of these parents, how can they properly prepare and parent the child, which makes the child coming into this athletic world already at a disadvantage? And then what do people say? People say, well, why can't you just get over it? Why can't you just put that behind you? Well, Lauren, you got out. What's the Well, here's the thing. Everybody has a backstory. Everybody does. One of the things I shared with you all before we went live is the lessons that I've been working on with my spring students this semester is making the connection between their identity, their social system, and the larger immediate community and global community. In essence, how are you showing up? How are the stereotypes and the biases that you are required to deal with every day of your life influencing how you're showing up? What is your worldview? How does it impact how you function and make sense of the world that you live in? And for some of these scholar athletes, they're clueless beyond their athletic ability. They are walking around in an actual fog without a clue. And because there isn't appropriate representation that can meet them in that place of common humanity with an open mind and an open heart that says, you know what, I'm not going to discount your Black or brown experience. I'm not going to allow you to use it as an excuse for mediocrity. You're not going to be allowed to use it as an excuse, but I'm not going to be so insensitive that I'm not going to take into consideration how it has impacted you. And here's the example for Dr. Pitts's lived experience that to help you to catch a visual. My entire life, if people go on my website and they read my bio, it's like, oh my goodness. My entire life has been laden, when I say laden with with gun violence, domestic violence, sexual abuse, neglect, and maltreatment, broken homes, mental illness, like the list goes on and on and on. I was 2 years old, and I don't recall it, but here's the thing, vicarious trauma. I was 2 years old the first time there was a violent death in my family related to gun violence. And that was when my uncle shot my aunt and killed her. I was 2. He has a daughter that's the same age as I am. We've been hearing about that our whole life. The next incident was when another relative shot and killed someone. I was only in 1st or 2nd grade when that happened. So that one I was up close and intimately connected to. You all have heard me say before that I was in 5th grade when the uncle that shot and killed my aunt came home from prison and started sexually abusing me. The residual effects of that incident. I was in 8th grade when one of my cousins shot another cousin, his brother, because he didn't turn the radio down when he told him to. So I come home from school to news reporters and helicopters and ambulances. I was in high school when one of my boo things, because I had a couple, one of my boo things, his senior year in high school, who ended up being my husband, he and his girlfriend at the time were shot. Didn't know if he was going to make it. Then, I'm not done. Then cousins decide that they're going to engage in armed robbery and rob a Wawa. Then another cousin decides that the perpetrator who brutally raped his sister, he decides he don't need to be on the earth no more. So he goes to prison for several years for killing the guy that raped his sister, my cousin. And the list goes on and on and on. And most recently, just 2 weeks ago, I'm in session and I get a text message from my mom saying that one of my female cousins was shot in the face and left for dead in the street. That's just a teeny tiny portion of Dr. Pitts' story. What does that look like for the student athlete or any child that doesn't have an appropriate support system, that lives in a home where people say, what go on in this house, stay in this house, and we ain't talking about our business out there for them people. I don't want all these people up in my face. So there's no mental health care. But little Hakeem diagnosed with ADHD. No, little Hakeem got PTSD, but he can ball his butt off. Who that boy can ball? Have you seen him handle that ball? He played football, basketball, and baseball, y'all. He gonna be my ticket to sit tea by the pool.
If it got ball in it, he playing it. Yep. And we see, and for these student athletes, those traumas, the sport becomes their cope. That's how they cope with it. They cope with it on that field, on that court, on that baseball field. That's how they cope with it. And we see, and we've talked about this, when somebody has a sports performance-based identity, when that identity is ripped away from them. When your entire life, and I was a victim of this as well. I wasn't, exposed to the amount of trauma that some of my teammates were exposed to, but I had a sports performance-based identity. And when that identity was ripped away from me, I felt vulnerable. I felt like I didn't know who I was. So I acted out. I acted out emotionally. Whatever came to my mind, that's how I responded. That's how I treated people, because I no longer saw value in myself, because I wasn't able to do the one thing that was my escape from the world. And you take that with somebody who has, severe trauma in their life, and you take that away from them, whether it's because of academic, like we talk about the show Last Chance U and how that's glorified, but all those kids on that show, they are all results of residual trauma that's passed down through their family members. And here you are, you're dangling this thing over their head, whether it's football, now they have Last Chance U basketball.
I just saw that last night.
You're dangling this dream over their head like, hey, look, we see all the trauma you've been through. We see how dysfunctional your family is. We see how dysfunctional you are. But look, this is literally your last chance. And even just the name of the show, Last Chance U. Like, this is your last chance of having any type of a livable,
of not going to prison.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that title alone is horrible. Last Chance.
It's triggering.
Because
it's very triggering, because it's an ultimatum.
You have millions of chances.
Absolutely.
Billions of chances.
And one of my favorite sports quotes is by the great Muhammad Ali. And his quote is, if I think the same way at 50 than I did at 25, then I've wasted 25 years of my life.
Right.
You take a show like Last Chance U, and you're telling these kids like, hey, look, I mean, well, hell, the first 18 years of your life, you had no control over. You were just the consequence of the things that happened around you. But here you are at 19 and 20, and you might have made a couple wrong decisions, but here you are at 19, 20 years old. It's either you figure it out right now, or just cancel the rest of your life, because you're not going to figure it out. And that's so dismissive of just people in general, especially Black people. It's like, so you mean to tell me how I think right now at 29, I'm going to think this at 19, I'm going to think this at 29 or 39 or 49? You mean to tell me I'm just going to continue to waste the years of my life, a life that I didn't ask for, a life that I was exposed to that I definitely didn't ask for, and was brought up in a life that who would choose to live like this? But you're telling me, because I was exposed to this, I lived in this environment, that my only choice is to say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, and do what I'm supposed to do in a classroom and on a football field, a baseball field, a basketball court. And if I don't do that, then my rest of my life is just worthless, because I can't be a contributing member to society because of what you telling me. This is my last chance at 19 years old. That's BS.
Look, folks, when we tie this all together with the bow, everybody knows that House Talk, formerly House Talk, and now House Talk PreGame is all about solution-focused strategies. It's all about this systemic, holistic, strength-based approach to resolve. We share week in and week out all of this knowledge, all of this wisdom, all of this passion about the issues that are plaguing our homes and our communities and this nation, and truth be told, the world, where our student athletes are concerned. And you can become a student athlete, you go into gymnastics, which is, little teeny tiny boys and girls. That starts at 2, 3, 4 years old. You come into midget football and t-ball and all that stuff, you're talking 5, 6 years old. So these kids are coming out the womb almost being prepared to go into the athletic arena. I believe that systemically the solution is, in order for these scholar athletes to have a holistic experience, in order for them to be equipped, that championship mindset that there is so much emphasis on. Case in point, Patrick Mahomes' daughter, we have an idea that they're gonna, rear this child to be, growth minded and championship minded. But that same championship mentality has to be instilled in our children where education is concerned. It's not about per se education with the end game being going to college and getting a college degree, because as we've stated previously, a college education is not for everybody. And truth be told, you don't have to go to college to be able to be a professional athlete, but you do have to be intelligent. You do have to be able to have a sound knowledge base that equips you to be able to function in this society efficaciously. You need to be able to function in this society, to be able to put appropriate protective factors in place that equip you to be able to navigate this world that we live in ways that hopefully will keep you and members of your family from becoming a negative statistic. So that's the solution that we want to leave you with today. Education, education, education. We are not suggesting for a moment to take your eye off of the prize of going into one of the professional leagues. But what we are telling you is that window of time in the professional league is a very short-lived window of your life. There is life before sports, there is life after sports, there is life during sports. And in order for you to be able to navigate the academic and athletic experience simultaneously, you have to be educated in order to be able to do that effectively. Stop viewing sports through a tunnel vision lens. Education, education, education. Parents have to be educated, scholar athletes have to be educated. And if you don't have the appropriate representation in your school, in your athletic program, there are resources that are available and we're living on a virtual platform now. There are resources available to you that can help you to navigate this athletic world and to navigate life in general efficaciously, so that here's your new one, so that you are able, in and off of the field, the arena, wherever you are, in a pro-social manner that affords you opportunities to live the life you love living, whether you go to one of the professional leagues or not. That's all we have for you today, folks. We will see you next week. We want you to tune in. Next week's show is going to be off the charts too. Come on, join with us. We'll see you back next week on HT Pregame with Dr. Lauren Pitts. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you.